what I do.
We sue the one closest to the act. And in this case, African nations are the source of the sale. They put human beings on the block. They took the payments. They helped destroy millions of lives, including the lives of their own cousins, brothers, and neighbors. So don't tell me we want justice if you're not ready to go all the way back to the beginning. Reparations can't be about emotion, family. It must be about responsibility. And legal responsibility starts at the origin of the injury. My job is simple. Follow the facts. Follow the law and make the foundational Black Americans whole again. No apologies, no exceptions. See, we're having a real conversation today. See, a lot of us foundational Black Americans have spent years romanticizing Africa. Some of y'all had little African medallions on. Some of y'all still refer to Africa as the motherland, the homeland. We look at the continent like it's some kind of ancestral utopia. We adopt African names and wear kente cloth and speak about the motherland with mythical reverence. But here's the cold, hard truth. Africa was not just the victim of the transatlantic slave trade, it was a co-conspirator. Now, I know some people are clutching your chest right now. They'll say, oh, but Dennis, slavery in Africa was different. They'll say they didn't know what was happening in America. And the worst one, you can't blame modern African countries because they didn't even exist back then. Well, let's deal with that step by step. So the transatlantic slave trade lasted nearly 500 years. But the sub-Saharan slave trade, where they were taking Africans across the Sahara Desert by Arab traders, that lasted 1,600 years before that. It was 1,600 years it was around. So you mean to tell me, a thinking man, that for over a millennium and a half of selling their own people, these African elites didn't know what they were doing? Let me educate you. There were African slaves who freed themselves, rose to power, and then turned right back around and sold others into slavery. That's not ignorance, that's strategy. That's full participation. These weren't illiterate tribesmen being manipulated by the white man. We're talking about kings and generals and merchants, people like King Gizo of Dahomey, who made his kingdom's economy dependent on slave raiding and warfare. What about King Alfonso I of the Congo, who corresponded in fluent Portuguese with the king of Portugal, begging for more priests and guns while still participating in the slave trade? What about the Ashanti rulers who traded enslaved people for muskets, brandy, and textiles and operated with the full awareness of the Atlantic system? Some of these men had Portuguese last names. I'm talking about the kings. They dressed in European fashion and they sent their children to be educated in Catholic schools in Lisbon. They knew exactly what they were doing in the so-called New World. They weren't in the dark. They weren't in a room at the table. They weren't swinging through the trees. They were educated men. They were profiting. Shout out to Gloria Sabry. So when modern day apologists say, well, Ghana didn't exist in 1750, they're right. But that doesn't matter. And let me explain why. As an attorney who drafted this law, I'm going to tell you how the Successor State Liability Act works. In the foundational Black American Slave Trade Restorative Justice Act of 2025 that I sent to Trump and the 2 Texas senators and all these other intelligent people, and the proposal, I make it very clear. Modern nations can be held accountable as successor states to the historical kingdoms that committed human rights violations. The law uses language and precedent similar to what's found in cases of Nazi-era restitution or JASTA lawsuits against Saudi Arabia. And it defines an African sovereign as any modern nation that succeeded or inherited the territory, government, wealth, or legacy of a historical regime materially involved in the post-1808 transatlantic slave trade. These successor states benefited economically, politically, and socially from the wealth accumulated through the trafficking of our Black bodies. And many continue to preserve national heritage and monuments and traditions rooted in those same empires. It doesn't matter that Benin wasn't called Dahomey anymore. Just like Germany was held accountable for the Nazis, or Turkey for the Ottoman Empire, successor liability applies. This is a standard legal doctrine in international law. Hell, it's a standard legal doctrine in corporations law. And when you look at Section 6 of the proposed legislation, I explicitly waive sovereign immunity for those nations in cases involving violations of human rights, like slavery and forced labor. So for those saying Ghana didn't exist, understand, the kingdom of Ashanti did. The kingdom of Dahomey did. And today's African nations carry the political, geographic, and legal inheritance of those kingdoms. That's the legal basis, and that's how we go forward. So let me be clear. This isn't about hating Africa. This isn't about shame or division. It's about honesty, accountability, and justice. You cannot heal what you refuse to confront. And you can't claim to want reparations if you're willing to go all the way back, if you're not willing to go all the way back to the source. I'm not asking anyone to pick up a sword. I'm telling you to pick up the law and use it. Because this time we're not begging, we're suing. Now, look, you know, in this era of social media and digital echo chambers, there's been a dangerous rise in misinformation, particularly when it comes to the origins of Black people in America. Look, there's a growing trend online of charlatans telling us that every African person in America is actually descended from Native Americans. And that somehow our true lineage is not African, but Comanche or Cherokee or Choctaw, and so on and so forth. Now, while it's true that some Black folks may have Native American ancestry, let's be intellectually honest here. The DNA tests don't lie. The same one that showed you that little big head boy that don't look nothing like you ain't your child also shows you that you are 9 times out of 10 of West African lineage. The genetic data shows clearly that Native Americans were not sub-Saharan Africans. The indigenous peoples of the America had a distinct genetic, cultural, and geographic origin. And while there are fascinating stories like the one of Abu Bakr II, the Malian ruler who allegedly sailed to the New World with 200 ships in the 14th century, these are still largely matters of folklore, not fact. I grew up in the era where people like Dr. Shaka Musa Barashango were challenging the mainstream narrative, and I appreciate the cultural awakening that came from his work. I watched his lectures back in the 1990s, and one that sticks out to me is European holidays in the African Holocaust. He planted seeds of pride, okay? But he never told us to replace fact with fantasy. And here's the fact: the vast majority of Africans are descendants of enslaved Africans forcibly brought to the America during the transatlantic slave trade and bred here in breeding farms. They were shipped all over, from Brazil to Barbados to Louisiana to Lima. In the United States, it wasn't just importation, it was the industrialized reproduction. I spoke about that. Breeding farms, the most important plantations that are never talked about. Breeding farms. DennisSpurling got the mic on fire. Black father, I have black son. Tune in, weekly feeling inspired.
change the light. Subscribe, hit the like, won't you dare. Share the love, you know it's family. Join us every week, don't be late. Drop some coins in the collection plate. Drop some coins, enjoy the ride, come say hi. Catch the wave, don't pass by. Lifted spirits always in sight. In this podcast, joy takes flight. Subscribe, hit the like, won't you dare. Share the love, you know it's fair. Join us every week, don't be late. Drop some coins in the collection plate. Drop some coins.
Donation. I thought it was a class.
Welcome to DennisSpurling Podcast.
Hey man, I'll do what I do. You know that.
Your ass class, don't come over here. You tall black motherfucker. Women up inside. I don't give a fuck about